Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm continuing on with my interviews/conversations with prominent individuals to talk about storytelling and culture. Also, just to let you know, what you're looking at in the background is some of the art from my new graphic novel, The Valiant Heroes. The link to order that graphic novel is in the description. It is an 82-page superhero graphic novel of suspense, epic storytelling, and fun. So if that looks or sounds appealing to you at all, you might want to click on that link in the description and go on over and see if my graphic novel is for you. And very quickly, I just want to thank everyone who is sharing the link for my graphic novel as well. Since Indiegogo has shadow banned my campaign, which it has done now for many comic creators, the only way we can get the word out there is by good old-fashioned word of mouth. So thank you all. Now, on to the conversation. All right, so today I'm continuing on with my interview with various influential people concerning story and culture. And today I'm talking with Irene Strychalski, and she is the creator of her own crowdfunded comic, Fiendish, and is a former employee for Marvel who decided to go out on her own. Welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So I want to talk a lot about your training, your well, I would have to say university training within art to begin with. But before I get there, I usually ask people a very fun question, I find, anyways. What would be your favorite story?
My favorite story. Oh boy, that is a bit of a hard question. Hmm. I have several favorites, but you're asking me to pick one. Uh Jeez. Everyone knows my favorite manga is Berserk, but that's not quite done, so I don't think I can pick that. Um I feel like saying Lord of the Rings would be a little expected, but it is. I think if I was just looking at pure story, I'm gonna think of something afterwards that that just like that. I'm just gonna be like, oh, I forgot. This is actually the one I should have picked. But yeah, I would have to say probably that either Lord of the Rings or Princess Mononoke, and both of their themes I really I find very compelling. It just there's so many different levels to both of those works, and I think they're masterpieces. They're my favorites of their respective mediums.
So I take it from your answer that you're very much a fan of fantasy. Is that correct?
I am. That is correct.
Also, the other question I was going to ask right off the bat was, do you find you're more attracted to comics, Western comics, or to manga?
I think since I grew up in Asia, so I just grew up with more manga, and because of that, I read more of it. As far as which one I prefer, there's a sort of comfort in what I grew up with. But to be honest, there's a lot of manga that's bad as well. I think right now manga is going through a renaissance and a very productive period with a lot of exceptionally good work, and American comics is kind of the opposite. But on the other hand, I don't. If you include European comics in the umbrella of Western comics, then European comics are probably my favorite form of the medium, and I kind of lament that I never really seem to be able to get my hands on any. A lot of it looks beautiful, but it's not translated. But the stuff I've read, I really like one of my after Berserk, I think one of my favorite comics are Lock and Key and Black Sad, which is a European series, So uh, I think the medium of comics is it's a medium. There are different publishing formats across the world, and there are the three major industries in Japan, United States, and Europe. But at the end of the day, it's a medium. It's I don't really differentiate that much between them.
Okay. So, what I really wanted to ask you, because what I'm doing with these interviews is I'm talking about storytelling mostly, and you are a visual storyteller. What you are trained in is sequential art, is that correct? And animation. So, do you find your work more an artistic expression or a form of storytelling?
A form of expression or storytelling. I suppose art that's a form of expression would be like um, people who like abstract paintings and stuff, right? This is interesting because it's something I've been trying to differentiate as well. I've been having a lot of debates with my friends over, well, is art subjective? And I think largely not so, but it's also because working in comics and being around most artists I'm around are comic artists and animators. Comics are under the umbrella of communication arts, commercial art and communication art. And those disciplines of art specifically are much more objective because the objective point of what we do is to communicate a story. And even illustrations, in editorial illustrations for example, the goal is to communicate. And if people don't know what you're drawing, it doesn't matter what feeling they get from like the splash of ink you put on there. It doesn't it, if the story is not there, illustration is storytelling as well. It's then you failed. So for my specific discipline, I would say comics is definitely a medium of storytelling, and it's a medium of storytelling within art. It's a division of the artistic disciplines that is communication based and storytelling based.
That's very interesting because that actually leads right into my other questions. Because what I've been doing over the last couple of months is listening to a lot of interviews with older comic artists and reading them, the old ones. So
Mm-hmm.
with Jack Kirby or John Buscema or Gil Kane. So you have these artists like Gil Kane who were trained like you at an art school, and you have other artists like Jack Kirby who are
Mm-hmm.
mostly self-taught. So you can see, I can see in the way that they express themselves a very large difference in what they're going for in the sequential art that they had put down on a page. So my question was, within your training, do they still, I mean, everybody's always talking about the corruption of a lot of the higher learning institutions right now towards a more ideological bent. And I myself can attest to that because I was in the university system for so long. But is the same thing occurring within art schools, or is there still a classical training focus on things like the correct proportions of the body to a T, like I would listen to Gil Kane talk about? Is that still there?
I can't actually speak to what art schools are like right now. I think I was fortunate enough to get out right before I know any ideological takeover, or like any, you would say, more woke trends came to my school specifically, like right before, I'm sure. But I will say that what has happened, I have gone back to my alma mater to do portfolio reviews since then, and so about like 5 years, 5 or 6 years after I graduated, and I noticed a difference in how the teaching was, and I think, um, honestly, this was sad to see. I noticed a difference in approach to critique, and that really disturbed me because so when you are yourself an artist and you slowly learn how to give critique as well as take critique. These are both skills, and giving critique is also a skill. I mean, you can be bluntly honest, but generally if you want to not come across, if you want to actually help people instead of come across as just mean, you start with the positives. There's like a process to it, and then you have to gauge whether the person wants to be a professional and like what they're aiming for, their level, and tailor make it to them, go in slowly. So anyways, so I just like, you have to watch for their response. And I remember being in art school, and we would go to a convention, a group of us students. There was like we would like the school wouldn't take us to conventions, but like we would all go. There was a convention in Charlotte, in North Carolina, and so everybody in Atlanta would drive there, and then we would. I remember we would go to Sanford Green because he was brutal, and we wanted his critique because he was brutal, and it was like a badge of honor if you could take his critique, and if he said even one good thing about you, then like it was like the best thing ever because everybody knew he was merciless. And that's how we approached things when we were in art school. And but when I went back to see these newer students, it seemed like nobody could really handle anything negative. It was very hard to get through and speak about things they had to improve on without clearly making them uncomfortable. And I think that's So I don't know like how the classes are, if there's an ideological takeover, but I think what I would define a lot of woke culture is the end result is anti-meritocracy, and that is something I have noticed.
Okay, that's actually again leads right back into what you were saying before about the difference between objective art and subjective art. Because I was just listening to a podcast, I think it was 2 weeks ago, that Marvel put out. They put it out on their website, and they were discussing mentorship with newer people coming into the company, and that's one of the things that I noted within that podcast. They were talking about how the mentorship should not be judgmental in any way. And they didn't use that phrase, but to me, it sounded like kid gloves were being used for everyone coming into the company. And I thought to myself, that's not a way to build up a newer person that's coming in, whether they be a storyteller or an artist. I think more of a challenge is needed in order to make sure that your product that you're bringing out within sequential art or within storytelling um, needs to have that push in order for it to grow. Well, I think what you've said right already has agreed with that, but I'll ask you again. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do agree. I think I don't understand why anyone would not want a challenge. It's that's the only way you can improve. You know, and greater the challenge, the better. It's fun to it's fun to compete, and it's like there's it's also you don't want to like be dicks to each other and stuff in general, but I remember just and I'm grateful that I am just barely old enough to remember, and I also didn't grow up in America, so that's probably why. I mean, it's apparently America has had like a lot of my generation. I'm a millennial. Everyone says millennials are raised with like participation trophies or whatever. I don't know if that's true, but maybe it is. And but that idea is just baffling because in Asia, where I grew up, that nobody gets participation trophies. And how do you improve if you're not constantly looking for a challenge? It's it's uncomfortable. I think that a lot of like what you were saying with the way Marvel approached these like apprenticeships, they it's almost like they've overemphasized protecting people's feelings, which is like I think that there's a balance to be had, and all the balance is being put on protecting people, but at the expense of other things, because sometimes temporary discomfort in the moment is worth it because it's for a greater goal, right? It's uncomfortable to hear that your work isn't as good as you think. It's uncomfortable to have your flaws pointed out to you, but in the long run, it's worth it because that's the only way you'll improve. And it's it's because of that discomfort and hard work and overcoming both your own like your mental state and your own and improving your skills that makes when you do achieve something, when you do get that praise, when you see that improvement in your own work, when you see that leap in your own artwork and have those breakthroughs, that's even better. That feels like a bigger accomplishment. And I think a lot of people aren't willing to embrace that now.
So to jump over to your graphic novel, which is Fiendish, I just want to ask because I put out my first graphic novel at the same time yours came out. We had crowdfunding campaigns up at the exact same time. Um, did you find that
Yeah.
you were able to get a lot of critique, useful critique, from for your art, from simply putting it out there in the format that you have it out now?
Yeah, I think most of the critique, well, the other artists and other people who had done crowdfunding campaigns before me, right away they were very helpful and would give me suggestions on like what to do to better run the campaign, because with crowdfunding the campaign is it's like it's initially, at least, like clearly the book quality is the most important thing, but initially to get the book in front of people and get people to read the book, your campaign has to be run well. So there was a lot of tips, and I don't even like see it as critique, I guess, like just it's like you should do this thing better with your campaign. After people got book one, because book one's already out, I'm working on book two right now. There were the people would do reviews, and that's sort of the thing with going independent, and you're not going through a publisher, you're selling direct to the customer, and also in the space of YouTube, where people kind of are just honest, and people do YouTube video reviews of your book, and you can't tell people not to. You can't get mad about it. You just have to listen to it, and people would critique the book, and people had some good points. Though I will say, people, well, largely it was positive feedback, so I'm grateful for that, because it's in this environment, nobody has a reason to treat you with kid gloves, and I like that.
So I actually have a copy of your book right here in front of me because I did order a copy. So first question about the book itself. You
Hey,
did do all of the art, including the cover art. I know you have a separate colorist for the inside, but did you color the cover?
yeah, I colored the cover. I'm just a really slow colorist, and I don't like doing interiors. So, but yeah, I color covers and pinups and so.
So I wanted to ask you, is that something that you studied, color theory, when you were studying sequential art? And the reason why I ask is because I became fascinated with this topic probably about 2 years ago now. And I always have to thank Kelly Sudakonic being the one who was on an interview saying that she doesn't see things with women's eyes. And I decided to go look up that fact. And I found out, yeah, there's scientific evidence that men's and women's eyes are actually constructed differently. They have different cell clusters in them, and women can see more colors than men and distinguish between color gradations better than men, and men see less colors in order to concentrate on movement and shapes. And the thing is that I just went down a rabbit hole when I learned that about color theory and the very fun things that you can do with color, with using, let's say, orange and teal to evoke emotion, to use red and yellow to make somebody hungry, to use purple and black in order to make something look disturbing. And the reason why I want to go down this rabbit hole with you is because when I look at the cover of your book, and it's supposed to be a book which is about monsters, and in the vein of Berserk, you do use black and purple very well in order to bring out what you want to convey with your art.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So we did study color theory, though. So I saw your video on men and women having different color perception, and that was really interesting. I remember seeing that, and it was like, oh, I think that's completely possible. That's true, because what I always look to is, so like, an American market is just absolutely insane. Even before woke culture, it's sort of, people have this weird aversion to pointing out like differences between men and women, as if that's just verboten to talk about. Is really weird. But in Japan, they have no such compunctions, and their genres within manga are literally defined by, besides when you have horror, you have gore and all that stuff, ecchi, and and that is, but then like it's shonen and shoujo, josei, and seinen. It's like, this is for men, this is for women, and like nobody gives a shit if you're insulted by that, because nobody is saying that means, well, a woman can't like seinen, because seinen is my favorite genre, and that's what Berserk and Vinland Saga and comics like that are. It's the target audience is adult males, but that's just the target audience, and it's kind of like seen like a thing. Of course you would have a target audience. So I started looking at the art differences between these and what appeals, and their industry really works. I mean, look at the sales. That model of just being honest about your target audience seems to be very effective. And yeah, and looking at the coloring between books that, even now in American comics, like all these YA books, versus the way comics used to be colored, even just beyond the fact that coloring technology is so different now with more advanced digital software, the colors you can achieve are better. I don't think that's the only thing that affects coloring, though. I think there's something more to it, and that was really interesting to me, and I kind of had a breakthrough as well. I mean, we weren't taught that. We were taught color theory and things like, well, obviously red is an aggressive color, blue is soothing and focusing, and then purple kind of is green is kind of eerie, purple is mysterious. I mean, these are sort of, I think, obvious things you kind of learn, I in trial and error. my color theory class was actually terrible, but in my actual coloring class for comics, because my major was sequential art, and we did have a whole class for coloring, and that's when our teacher taught us Photoshop and everything. You know, I had been using Photoshop for a long time before that, but anyways, I do remember that like our teacher would like mention these things. Yeah. Some of these things I was taught, but not specifically. For example, the fact that, well, superhero comics and action comics and comics that have a certain target audience are have a different aesthetic. Like they would, Americans are very shy and very averse to actually speaking these truths.
Okay, that's very interesting. The other thing that I was going to ask, you were originally going to put out your book Fiendish in black and white, if I remember correctly, and then you got Stretch Gold to color it. Would you rather it be black
Mm.
and white? I mean, because if you're more in tune with manga, you might want to simply publish in black and white. And there are some American books like things like Conan. There's Conan magazines and larger magazines within the history of North American comics that just published in black and white. But would you prefer that, or would you prefer the color?
Ahem. I don't actually know. I think it's so. I really like my colorist work. I think the book looks great in color now. So with book two, I'm not even doing a black and white version. I might do like an ink only, like sort of artist edition later, but that's besides the point. I think I intended to make it black and white, frankly, more because I didn't think I would raise that much money and I couldn't afford to pay a colorist. So with Fiendish, it's not meant to strictly be manga. I just have a strong manga influence, so I quite like it being in color. With the storytelling, just with the added layer of coloring, I can do more things, and I'm actually thankful for that. There was a lot of different things that like for example there's a fantasy race I made that they're purple, and in the black and white version you can't really tell, and then there's another race that they have like they look like humans but they have like red skin, and it's more obvious in the color, and then there's like my story is a little complicated. There's a whole magic system I made up, and like different this magic system, at least for humans, and is called rune casting, so it kind of like you cast runes and the runes create magical effects anyways, so and the runes have different colors, so having coloring, the runes are elemental, it's an elementally based system, so having the colors helps the reader remember which rune is for which element and stuff like that, so I kind of like it being in color. It just wasn't intended at first, but and I kind of adapted to it.
That actually brings me to a question that's probably completely off track for what we're discussing. But when I read your book, it seemed like there were ruins floating all over the place. Or am I mistaken on that? Like above the city, is that for a very specific reason? Is there ruins over the city to protect it? I just want to know. After I read it, I kept on thinking to myself, there's something there that I'm not getting.
Oh, those are sound effects. Yeah, no, there's so the runes
Oh, okay.
themselves, there isn't really the only rune casting in book one is at the sort of epilogue I added. Like I added 4 extra pages, sneak peek at a character that I introduced in book two. And if you know the scene I'm talking about, the she when she like creates this magical effect, she creates a rune, and that's what rune casting looks like. But all the other like the weird like writing that you see like above the city and like during fight scenes, those are sound effects, but they're just written in my constructed language. So I created a language for this comic, and uh and in the epilogue in chapter one as well, that character, when she's sort of like talking to herself after she fought this wild creature, and she speaks in this other language as well. I just thought it would be cool and a little immersive for the world to have even the sound effects be in Narsa, which is my constructed language. And that's my aim with this book, right? It's immersion. I want to build a fantasy world that doesn't feel like it's, well, this is just another Tolkien ripoff, or this is something that, oh, it's just elves and dwarves. No, I don't have elves and dwarves. I made up everything myself, all my, like, my own magics and my own fantasy races. So yeah, that's all part of it. I'm a little crazy, maybe.
And I also wanted to ask if you're a big fan of Berserk, are you a fan of Claymore?
I didn't read much of Claymore, though. What I think it annoyed me that I couldn't tell the characters apart from each other, but I know how the story goes and it seems really cool. The art was great, but it was like too much same face for me.
So I'll give you a chance right now to to talk about your second book if you want to do so. Where is the story going from here? Because within the first book, there is an introduction to this world, an introduction to the society that we're going to concentrate on, it seems. The two main characters and a side character who comes in, which looks like they're going to make up the core of the group that you're going to follow. What does your second book look like, and how's the story going to progress?
Right. So, one thing that I heard from book one was people liked the story, they liked the setup, it all made sense. And people really like Casimir, which I was glad because my main character, Casimir, is a bit of a dick, and I was worried that people wouldn't take to that, but they did. Though the one feedback was, most common feedback was they wish the story was, there was more story. It was a little too uncondensed because the way I told the story and like the visual storytelling was more manga based, because that's what sort of what I was used to doing. And I realized that with a primary American audience, even though people don't really mind a manga art style, they wanted more storytelling, more story material per book. And also with crowdfunding, I want to give people like more, a bigger chunk of story every book. So with book two, the main thing I did differently was condense the story a little bit, and there's, you're gonna get a lot of character development in book two. Book two is sort of a bridge between the events of book one, which is the characters just meeting, and them properly setting off on their journey. So it's they start out in the town, the characters get to know each other, we get to know who these people are, there's a little conflict in the town, and where we get to see how each of my core characters, Yomi, Kasumi, Isko, deal with a difficult situation. And then they kind of get to know each other, set out on their journey. There's a little bit of reveal about like one of the characters has a curse and everything, so just backstory and stuff. And then it ends when we meet the fourth main characters. I have four main characters, but only one protagonist. It's a kind of a weird structure, but I think it works. And that's Ragna. That's the green-haired girl, and they meet up with her at the end. So what people can expect is just a deep dive into the storytelling and the characters, and a lot of expansion on what their actual goals are and what each of these characters is like, and definitely a little more on the background of Dorvo and the monsters and everything like that.
It's funny. You sound almost the exact opposite of what I had gone through when I was putting my graphic novel together, because I was used to, well, what I had written previously is a manuscript for a novel, which I had to cut down when I got it professionally edited. It was massive. I had to cut it down to about 250 pages. But when I was trying to write the script for my graphic novel, which is just one continuous story, I had a hard time paring down the story so that I could get it into 80 pages. So, whereas you're coming from a manga chapter style, which is very short bursts, I'm coming from very large story, and like you, I'm creating a world wherein I want to be able to tell as much as possible, but you can't fit it all into one story, and I know the pains that you're talking about in trying to fit everything into the story that you're trying to tell while at the same time building a world. It's very difficult to do, especially within this medium, I think. And I'm lucky enough to have run across a couple of great artists. I have Renzo Rodriguez, who is the main artist for most of most of my book, the first book, and then for the second book, he does part, I think, is 24 pages for it. So yeah, I feel your struggle there. So
Yeah.
the other question I had The other question I had for you is on the mixture of what you see as a manga style into the Western style, which is what you have. You can see strains of it very, very well coming out through your art. But have you ever got, well, since you did work in the mainstream comics, did you ever get any pushback in that that's not the kind of art that they wanted? Or did they want you actually to go in that direction as just um, asking because I would like to know, the future of where comic art is going to.
So when I worked for Marvel, and I've said this before, but I do think because of I had a manga influence, I was pigeonholed into their YA books, and it's also very strangely, not that surprisingly, but I did notice even before the industry went very woke, I was only put on books with female leads, which is not a problem for me, but it's weird that that was the only thing I ever got, right? It's like I'm not a girl artist, guys. I am an artist. You can put me on any book, but that's apparently not the case. It's I suppose I could have complained more about it, but I just didn't quite feel like it. But that I don't know if that was sort of like a prejudice thing or an art style thing. With Marvel, they were open to a bit of a manga influence, but for like limited types of books, namely for, like I said, YA books and books for just a younger audience. With DC, I did show my portfolio to them multiple times, and the feedback was you're too manga. So I know they didn't hire me. At least at several editors I showed my work to because they just didn't like my style. And it would like it wasn't even that they didn't like it. They would say the work is good, but they didn't like it. And I heard this from other publishers as well, which is why I ended up, for various other reasons. There are other reasons, that I didn't end up going to a publisher for like just being able to own my own IP, and the like I didn't want a publisher to be able to, potentially screw me over on any IP rights or whatever. But so that's why I went to crowdfunding. But beyond that, I just really was fairly convinced by the time I launched Fiendish that no publisher would really accept my book, and even if they did agree to publish it, they wouldn't promote it very much because they would think that they have this sort of prejudice that, well, the American audience just doesn't like manga stuff, which is absurd because look at what's selling. I mean, even when I was like showing them this work probably like about 3 years ago, it was just absurd because even then manga was selling bonkers, and they didn't like anybody with explicitly manga influence. They would say your work is good, I like it, but we can't publish it, was the general gist of it. So yeah, weird. Maybe you guys should adapt, but who am I to say? I don't run these companies.
One thing I find with your art is that I'm aware only very loosely of cultural differences between the art within, say, American art or Japanese art, within manga and that sort of culture that consumes a lot of manga, supposedly, or so I'm told, according to people who study art, that the most expressive thing that people usually look towards in those cultures is the eyes. So if you're going to get expressions and if you're going to find out what someone is thinking, you look at their eyes. Whereas within North American and European cultures, it's you look at their mouth. And I found that very telling as where each of those cultures went with sequential art. Because if you'll notice, it's a funny thing because you'd worked on Silk, if I remember correctly, but
Mhm.
most characters that are superhero characters, if they don't have their face fully covered, they have their eyes covered and they leave their mouth exposed. But I find quite the opposite when you look at manga.
Mm.
You'll find it the other way around. And I think of it as an expression of that cultural norm of where you look to understand a person and what they're trying to say. I don't think it's anything else than a cultural norm, but I think your art actually has a mix of the two because you focus, well, not really focus, but you blend the two so well that your expressions have more depth than what you would normally get within someone who is working in one medium or the other, whether you're doing manga or North American comics. I know that's probably an unconscious thing that you do, but I'll have to say that you do it extremely well.
Thank you. It's not entirely unconscious or subconscious. It's I do actively try to merge the styles because I do like Japanese comics and also European comics, and I never wanted my style to be just like with Fiendish. This is my book. I get to draw it how I want. I finally get to draw in my own style. No one can tell me what to do. This is mine, finally. So I want this to be 100% how I want to draw. And this is a long form story as well. You were mentioning having to trim down Thomas Valiant or just like sort of trim the fat with the story. I think that's what you were saying. And I had to do the same thing for Fiendish because this is actually a fairly long story. And it was originally going to many, many books. It was like 20 something books. And then I realized this is just ridiculous. I had to I focused the story. I actually just went through like a huge writing phase where I got it down to about 12 books. They're going to be large books, like 80-page books, but 12 books, and I'll finish the story. But there's a lot of material that'll go in it. There will not be like a single wasted page. And so, but anyways, my point is this is something I'm in for the long run. And so I want it to be completely honest. This is my art style. And so because of that, I was honest with my influences. I like having a more European influence as well as manga influences. And even with manga, I'm more of a fan of comics like Berserk, and I mentioned Vinland Saga and Akira, and also Satoshi Kon's work. He's more well known as an animation director, but he was also a mangaka before that. And those are more seinen works that have more of a realistic art style. And that's another thing where I think a lot of Americans, even people in the comic industry, don't differentiate between shonen and seinen. They think manga and they just think of My Hero Academia or Naruto, and they don't realize that manga is just like a huge umbrella where there are many different art styles within. And with seinen, it's not, you don't get like a lot of like huge eyes, like silly humor. It's meant for adults. It's fairly realistic, and a lot of seinen has heavy influence from European comics. Also look at Miyazaki's Nausicaa manga. Nausicaa was a manga before it was made into a movie, and his art style it looks like he loves Mobius. He's a really big fan of Mobius. It looks like Mobius drawing manga. Like the hatching, it was 100% from Mobius. So there's a lot of co-influence between manga and European comics. So that's I went for it in between on purpose, and I think it works. And I'm glad that people have taken well to it because that's what I aim to do. I want to bring out the best of both worlds.
It's funny you should mention that because I do read a little bit of manga, not too much, but I do watch a lot of anime just because I find that it has a more, well, a purer story than what you're going to get with a lot of entertainment here from North America. And that's one of the things that I never really understood. And you just explained it to me. I was always drawn to anime that actually has a more realistic style to it and not realizing that it would be part of a subgenre within anime and manga itself. I always thought that would be something that they should
Mhm.
emphasize more. So thank you for that. You've made my ability to choose.
Yeah, yeah.
You made my ability to choose much easier when I go to try to watch something. So I just want to. I wanted to ask you: is your campaign for Fiendish 2 still up? I did not get to look before we got on here.
Oh, it is still up. Yeah, it's in demand right now.
If you want to plug your book, I'll give you some time to do that right now.
Sure. All right. So Fiendish 2 is the exciting continuation to Fiendish 1 that was released last year, and it did very, very well. So thank you so much to everybody who has backed both Fiendish 1 and Fiendish 2 so far. Book 2 is 74 pages right now, is a giant book, and we continue following the story of Casimir and the companions that he has taken on this journey to find the truth behind the demons that destroyed his hometown many, many years ago. In book one, we were introduced to the basic premise of the story. Casimir's hometown and family were wiped out by mysterious demons, and even though it's a fantasy world, nobody really knows where these monsters come from. And years later, the same monsters reappear. So Kaz decides that he is not going to run away from his past anymore, and he's going to get to the bottom of this mystery. So if you like Lovecraftian horror, fantasy, lots of action, and gore — gore is important, I do not shy away from that — then this is the comic for you. Check it out right now on Indiegogo.
All right, with that, I think we'll wrap it up. I want to thank you very much, Irene, for coming and discussing visual storytelling with me. Thank you again.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
So, if you've made it this far into the video, I just want to remind you that the link for my graphic novel is in the description. If you're nostalgic for the 80s, or simply want to see those great storytelling elements brought forward into a new story, then you might want to click on that link in the description and go on over and see if my graphic novel is for you. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you next week. Bye.